So we are recording this. It will be available to you on the FAQs a little bit after the Q&A session here, probably by next Tuesday at the very latest. We will have not only this recording posted on the Blue Skies FAQs page, but we'll also have a written transcript with all of the questions that you've submitted to us in advance with their full written responses. We are going to go over them here, but you'll have that document to be able to look back on in the future, to have those full written responses. And then hopefully we should have some time toward the end of the session today where we can open up to any additional questions, either that pop up as a result of things that you hear during today's question and answer session, or something that maybe you just didn't get a chance to ask in advance previously. So with that, Janice, I'm going to ask you if you could go ahead and move to the next slide. This is just a quick look at the agenda of what you can expect for the call today. We're going to start out with some welcome and introductions here in a moment. And then our NASA sponsors, Kaushik Datta and Stephen Holtz, are going to be talking with us a little bit about the context for the challenge, why it's important to NASA, why NASA decided to invest in it, kind of what they're hoping to get out of this challenge. We'll go over a couple of general technical remarks that came through where there were several questions that were kind of all asked in the same vein. So we want to make sure that we spend some extra time clarifying some of those, as well as some more programmatic remarks. Then we'll get going right into answering those questions that we received in advance and allow for those additional questions at the end of this. We'll wrap it up and give you guys some information about what to expect next, and we'll be on our way. So next slide, please. I've already introduced myself as the program manager, Stacy Dees, but we also have Shelly Spears, our program director, Janice Curbton Miller, who's the senior program coordinator for this particular challenge, and Victoria O'Leary, who's another senior program coordinator in our office who supports this challenge on an as-needed basis. You'll mostly be receiving emails from myself and Janice, but you may occasionally hear from Shelly or Tori. So we wanted to make sure that we introduced everybody to you guys. And if the program staff is on the line and wants to turn your camera on and just give a little wave so everybody can see your faces in addition to these photos here, this is an amazing team, guys, and you're going to love working with them. Next slide. And again, I mentioned our amazing NASA sponsors who thought this competition up and have funded it, which is always key and most important here. Stephen Holtz, who you'll be hearing a lot from today, is the Blue Skies competition manager. He supports the University Innovation Project and the University Student Research Challenge within NASA's Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, who are the funders for the challenge. Kaushik Datta is the University Innovation Project Manager and supports all of those things that we just mentioned in addition to the University Leadership Initiative. Next slide, please. And Kaushik and Stephen, if you guys want to turn your cameras on and give everyone a wave, that would be great too. All right. So at this point in time, I am going to turn the mic over to Stephen to chat with us a little bit about why they are sponsoring the challenge and what they'd like to get out of it. And Kaushik, feel free to jump in at any point in time with anything that you'd like to add.
Thanks, yeah, and I'll be taking it. Kaushik's here and he'll have a chance to answer some questions in the chat if I can't get to them during the Q&A portion when I'm answering other questions. Janice, did you still want me to mention a little bit more about myself? I know we glazed over that slide pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go back and you can fill everyone in on a little bit about who you are and you know, your role and how everything relates to this challenge.
Sure, yeah, and as people on the line might see the University Innovation Project mentioned a few times on here. That's kind of just the overall project that houses the Blue Skies competitions right now, along with a few other projects. And Kaushik Datta is the project manager, and myself, Stephen Holes, I am the assistant project manager, and I'm in charge of the Blue Skies competition, which is why you'll be hearing a bunch from me today. So I am right now I'm the assistant project manager for UI, and when I'm not doing that, I'm working on aeronautics concepts as part of our aeronautics systems analysis group here at NASA Langley. I'm a little bit younger as far as NASA personnel go, so I'm a little bit closer to the university community than some of our colleagues. But a little bit about my path on how I got here. I went to undergrad at University of Central Florida, getting my mechanical engineering degree, and I stayed to get my industrial engineering degree for my master's. I had an undergraduate intern experience through the NASA internship program, and I came to Langley for that. And I wasn't actually working as much on the technical side for my first internship, but when I came back as a Pathways student during my grad school experience, I was working on the Environmental Responsible Aviation project. And so from the beginning of my NASA career, I've kind of had a little bit more of a personal interest in the environmental technologies that you might be researching into as part of this project.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Um, A side note as we're going through this, everyone, if you have any additional questions or need clarification on anything, please feel free to use the chat. Stephen is going to take a few minutes now to go over the competition and make some technical remarks.
Sure, can you still hear me?
Sure can.
Thanks. And yeah, so I'll give a little bit of a background on why we're doing this and what kind of things we're expecting. NASA in general, obviously, does a lot of research into aeronautics technologies, and a lot of those affect the effect that those planes have emission-wise on the environment, etc. And obviously, that's becoming a lot more of a concern with climate change and global warming. And we've had a big push from a lot of our people, researchers here at NASA and our current administration to look more into climate-friendly aviation. And we thought this would be a good way to get students at the university level involved in researching technologies that might already be underway being researched to combat climate change as far as the effects of aviation go, but also to get students interested to the point where maybe they'll decide to help join the research community down the line. And so that's kind of our inspiration behind the project, to really get students involved, researching, and excited for the technology changes that are going on in climate-friendly aviation. Now, what we actually hope to see out of some of these projects that you all will be submitting, um, we really want to start everyone doing research into the landscape of the 2050s aviation market. And that could be looking at technical papers, it can be looking at studies, it could be looking at what kind of research is going on in NASA or industry or pretty much anywhere for aviation and technology. Um, Now, when you do your technical paper, we'll want you to take your research that you've been doing and describe a little bit of what do I expect, not me as Stephen, but you as the student doing the research, what do you see the aviation world of the 2050s looking like? So that could be what kind of planes are being flown. What does the aviation markets look like? What kind of fuel do these planes use? All the different aspects of the aviation market, and then design an airport with the appropriate technologies to support your vision of the 2050s aviation landscape. And then so step one, right? Do your research, find out what the landscape looks like, synthesize that research into painting a picture for us of what you think the 2050s aviation landscape looks like, and then use that painted picture of the 2050s aviation landscape to make your design choices and justify those choices in your technical paper for the 2050s airport. The last step of that will be taking both your vision for the 2050s landscape and your 2050s airport, and then explaining to us in an infographic how all of those come together. What are your design choices? What are the technologies? why, why did you make those design choices? And so that gives everyone kind of a creative outlet to explain in maybe a little bit more simple way, especially to people that might not be technical, what the future might be like and the exciting technologies that'll be there.
Now, Stephen, let me ask a clarifying question for everyone on the line. Can you describe to us what um, sort of what the difference is in your in terms of expectations between the infographic and, say, a poster?
Yeah, so I guess typical research posters are a little bit more heavy on the technical side. And so really want this infographic to be very, very big on the visual elements. Um, we'd be happy to see what people's designs look like. We'd be happy just for people to, you know, put various technologies on there that they mention. It's a way for you to summarize your research and designs uh, to anyone who wants to learn more about your research and designs or what your paper was about. Um, it's going to be a little bit less technical in the sense that you'll still be mentioning the technologies, but not in a way that only someone who's technical or an engineer will understand. People will want to know from your infographic, hey, I understand really not just what the technologies this person describing are going to be there, but why we need them and why they're in the airports of tomorrow.
Great. Thank you for that. And then one other thing that would probably be good to talk about a little bit here is sort of a little bit of clarification around what the competition is looking for in terms of the external aspects of the airport. This is a great opportunity for us to clarify for our teams, what we're looking for and what we're not necessarily looking for. And we'll see some of those questions, teams, here as we move into some of the technical questions.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get more into some of those when we go over the technical questions. So apologize ahead of time to some of those who hear me repeating myself. A lot of the question answers do overlap, but we're more interested in the technologies that so the airplanes will have technologies and that will affect what we need to implement in the airports to support those new technologies, those new airplanes. And so that's a lot of what we want people to focus on is, if you have a new fuel, how is that going to affect the infrastructure that you need to make that fuel usable for airplanes? If you have different shape airplanes, how is that going to affect the airport? Is it going to affect the capacity? Is it going to affect the gate size? How you load people? Um, so we really want people to focus on the external components of the airport with respects to how it will be affected by the new climate-friendly aviation technologies and climate-friendly planes. So while you might mention that, hey, we have a runway like this, we don't want you to focus on the runway design or the tower design, and we don't need to know about how people are, if people are taking cars to the airport, we don't really need to know about how they get to the airport um, on ground transportation side. So we really want people to focus on the climate-friendly aviation technologies, airplanes, and the airport infrastructure that's needed to support those new technologies, if that makes sense. And like they said, please type questions in the chat because I might just be rambling. But I really want to make this clear so people have a good idea of what they can do going forward with this project.
No, I think that was very clear, Stephen. Thank you. And just to kind of tag on to a little bit of what you were saying, so we really are not interested on anything at all on the interior of the airport. We know that there's all kinds of really fun things like facial recognition softwares that might help you get through security lines and new ways that we can get through the ticketing lines faster and move from restaurant and order your food ahead before you even leave the airplane and all kinds of things that are going to be going on in the interior of the airport. And those are all cool and awesome and we're interested in them as well, but just not for this particular challenge. So really focus on just those external aspects of what happens outside of the airport. And Janice, if you wouldn't mind going ahead to the next slide, I think that segues really well into some of the other things that we were going to mention here. First of all, there's some things that are not on this slide that I just wanted to mention to everybody. This really is kind of a different and unique type of student challenge at NASA. Stephen mentioned that NASA wants to hear from you guys. They don't want you guys just regurgitating stuff straight back. They want you to do your research. But then with that research, what do you want to do with that? What vision for an airport can you see? They want to see your ideas. And really hear from college students about what you think might be happening in the future, because it might be very different from some of the things that they've envisioned. And there's an opportunity for us to learn from some of the things that you guys are doing. So it's pretty cool. The prize being an internship is also something that could be a life-changing event for any of you all that are lucky enough to have earned the opportunity for one of those 6 internship slots. As Stephen mentioned, he began as an intern. I began as an intern. Tori began as an intern with NASA. And so I can tell you I've been managing programs at NASA, student programs, for over 2 decades. And within those 2 decades, I can't tell you how many students ended up getting hired at NASA or within the aerospace industry or the aviation industry. And it all happened because of that internship. And it was the first step in their career. And so I really encourage you guys, as you're moving forward, to take this opportunity seriously, have fun with it, get creative, buckle up, give us your best designs, because it really could be the first part of an amazing career endeavor for you. And NASA is really, really good about trying to have a pipeline where students who get involved in their programs can then go on to continuing and contributing to their mission in some way, shape, or form, whether it's by hiring you as a contractor, hiring you as a civil servant, or lots of other different ways, putting you into different types of programs, finding ways to fund you for research on different things. So getting your foot in the door in a program like Blue Skies is a really amazing opportunity. You're now part of our NASA family just by being interested in participating in this. And so we really hope that you view yourselves in that same way. And that being said, with the proposal submission that you're submitting, the technical paper, the infographic, and your video submission is kind of your proposal package. And in that package, it is your opportunity to sell your proposed concept. So we want you to think about this almost like a Shark Tank-like thing, where you're standing in front of the Shark Tank judges who you have in front of you. Stephen and Koshik are sharks. And you need to sell your idea to them. Tell them why you think it's going to happen and what you think are the best options to design to accommodate all those changes that are happening in the future, and sell it. So as you're writing your technical paper, I want you to kind of be thinking about that in the backs of your minds. Some other things to be thinking of are, make sure before you get too far down the rabbit hole that you have really carefully reviewed the evaluation criteria. And we put it all out there for you, so you know exactly how those submissions are going to be judged. And it's very simple. They're going to be judged based on what was asked of you in the competition guidelines. And so we have provided a printable competition guidelines PDF. It's on the website. It's also right here if you want to hold your cameras on your cell phones right up to that QR code and take a picture of that. It'll send you a link directly to that, and you can print them from your phone. So we really encourage you to maybe take a minute to do that. Everything is listed for you that you could possibly imagine from the competition. There will be no surprises. You aren't going to get evaluated on something that is not listed there. So really the ball is in your court. You know what we're going to be evaluating you on, and we ask that you make sure that you really adhere to all of those competition guidelines and make sure that all of the things that are there are included. And we'll actually get a little bit more in detail in that in some of the responses to the future questions. One thing we wanted to mention is that at the NOI stage, there were several teams that did not yet have a faculty advisor, and that's a-okay at this stage. That's not a problem at all. But in order for you to actually submit your final technical paper, the infographic, and the video submission on March 3rd, which is our next deadline for the challenge, you do need to have a faculty advisor at that point, and you'll have to identify the faculty advisor and provide a cell phone number or a work phone number, as well as their email address. Because moving forward, if your team happens to be selected as a finalist, you'll be receiving a stipend award to help facilitate your participation in the forum. We will invite all of the finalists to attend a forum where you can present your designs and your research to the judges. And at that point, your faculty advisor will need to be in charge of managing the funds and following whatever university protocols are in place regarding travel and all of those sorts of things that you'll need to do. So you do have to have a faculty advisor. They can serve as mentors to you and provide as little or as much input as they want into your designs. That's kind of up to your team and your advisor to work out together. But we do want the students to be doing most of the work. One other quick thing before we jump into the questions. Did want to mention that originally when we posted the information out to the public about the challenge, we said that the Blue Skies Forum, which will be where the finalist teams come and present, that was going to take place on June 1st and 2nd. And due to a couple of different scheduling conflicts, we actually needed to adjust that date just by one day. And so the actual new forum dates will be June 2nd through 3rd. So it'll now be a Thursday, Friday instead of a Wednesday, Thursday. And that was to accommodate some of the Memorial Day travel issues. So hopefully that's a little bit easier for the teams who are selected as finalists. We just wanted to make sure that we noted that up front, that was a change. And all of that has since been changed on the website. And you're all aware of it now. So let's go ahead and jump into these questions. We will go through the questions that we received in advance first, and then at the end, we'll get to the questions that are in the chat. So if you do have some questions, feel free to keep adding them into the chat. If you did not have a response to something, you've got a burning question on your mind. Janice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we'll be keeping track of what comes in on the chat. I know Stephen has already answered a few things, and we'll be making sure to address everything as we come through, as long as we have time to do it. So let's dive into these technical questions. So Stephen, one of the questions that we received was, what type of future airplanes is this project most interested in? And sustainable fuel like hydrogen planes, electric airplanes, eVTOLs, etc. Is there a certain type of these airplanes that the project is more geared toward?
No, not one specific type of airplane. We're pretty open to knowing what you think the future is going to be like. We just ask that you justify the choices that you end up making and assuming for your 2050s aviation landscape. And I know I'm jumping to one of the ones in the questions in the chat, but I'm dragging it into this question. We're excited to hear about what airplanes you choose and why, but you don't necessarily need to really explain how an eVTOL works. That's not the point of the paper. You only have 5 to 7 pages to really tell us what your landscape vision and your airport design is. So we really want you to keep this at a higher level.
Okay, great. And what is the expected capacity for the airport? How many customers, how many airlines? What is the expected daily volume?
Yeah, and this also plays off another question in the chat. We don't have a specific size airport in mind. Obviously, you'd have a little bit less to write about, maybe if you're doing a small airport versus a large airport. We do think that it's important that you consider, all sorts of factors that are going to be important to the general aviation market, right? So if you choose an airport that doesn't have large operations, that might hurt you in the sense that you don't have the opportunity to talk about as many things as other students might. And so we really leave it up to you not only to choose a location, if any, for your airport, but through your research on the 2050s aviation landscape, decide what kind of factors will influence that airport, capacity-wise, environmental-wise, and how is that really going to affect my design choices and how do I explain that when making the justifications for those design choices.
Perfect. And sort of along those lines, what type of aviation is this focusing on? Are we looking at commercial, non-commercial, private, or other?
Yeah, I will say all of the above, especially depending on right what airport, what kind of locations you choose. But all of those areas are very important for the future, and we'll be seeing all of those areas change as we go into the 2050s with automation, right? That'll affect not only commercial but also private airplanes, even research airplanes, things like that. Packages will be delivered on large airplanes autonomously, possibly. Um, and however you paint that picture, it can include all of the above types of aviation markets, and maybe markets that don't exist yet.
Perfect. Should teams consider parking structures in the design of gates?
So if there's a technology or an airplane type that comes about in the 2050s that affects the overall design of the airport, it might be something you want to talk about. And as we said before, a lot of those variables that might have these effects are up to you. So if you say, hey, there's going to be no change in the tube and wing aircrafts, and I justify that with X, Y, and Z research, then maybe you won't have to change the gate structure. But if you say, hey, I might be using a hybrid or blended wing body, like in the picture behind the Q&A title, you might have to consider, will that affect where the planes pull into to pull up to the gate?
Perfect. Is there a specific location that the project should be based in?
No, there is no location that is specific that we require of the students. But as I mentioned before, if that affects other aspects of the airport that could have an impact on the airplanes or the technology used, like altitude or sea level, those things might want to be things you consider or mention in your design or justifications.
And you'll see a few of those variations of those questions in here too, but we want to make sure we answer everything. So next up was, should our design take into account multiple terrains, weather conditions, and elevation, or can we design for a specific location? In other words, is it a universal design or can it be zone specific?
Yep, and just like I said, you can do either, choose a specific location or make it more not genetic, generic, but you will still want to think about and consider all of those factors and mention them when giving justification for your various design choices. Um,
Okay. This is along the lines of something that you've already addressed, Stephen, and I think someone in the chat asked about the size of airport. Should we plan to work with a large international airport that will have dated infrastructure?
yes, and that's definitely something to consider if you choose to, depending on what kind of airport you choose, or if you choose a specific airport or location. During your research, you'll probably find that, you know, international air travel may increase or decrease over time, and we will have aging infrastructures, and so all of those things can be considerations that you make when making design choices in your technical paper.
Is there a budget to be considered when designing the airport?
No specific budget, uh, but you probably want to keep it a little bit reasonable. Obviously, everything has a budget in the future, one would think. So if it's generally feasible, we will kind of look out for those types of things in your design choices. If you start putting every bell and whistle and everything, it's possible, sure, if you can justify that those types of technologies might cost less in the future. But I think a lot of times people can tell uh, when something might be, non-feasible budget-wise. So.
Yeah, and to chime in there, back to what Stacy was saying earlier, it's up to each team to justify their design choices and make it make the most sense. So, What can we and what can't we design for runways, especially with their length and orientation to each other? And Stephen, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring something else into that question. We had someone ask about,
The land use.
yeah, the land use around the runway design.
Yeah, and Eduardo, if you could, I guess clarify what you mean on the land use around the runway. But I think it might still play into the same answer here. And you can design any aspect of the runway that you want to, but really ask that you don't focus on that, since we really want to focus on the climate-friendly airplanes and the climate-friendly technologies that'll be actually affecting the aviation travel in the future. So if you design your runway or decide to say, hey, I want to make the area around the runway eco-friendly in X, Y, and Z way, keep that short, because we really want you to focus on the climate-friendly aviation technologies.
Define airport. Does this refer to just the building or the whole site?
So I would say more the whole site. The airport, there's I want to say a million things, but there's a lot of things on an airport site that enable air travel, and a lot of those things might be changing with the technologies that we develop between now and 29 years from now. So a lot of those things are things you might want to consider, but definitely you can probably make your best judgment in determining which ones might have the biggest effect and which ones you really want to spend your page time on.
And that's a common theme, right, Stephen? Make sure that the amounts of time spent in the paper are justified.
So,
Um,
hold on, I guess Eduardo did clarify, so I did want to jump back to that
yeah,
for the
perfect.
land. Um, so I will use an example, Eduardo. So if you said technology is put in place around the runway, so let's say this is just an example. Please don't take this anyone saying this is something you have to do. But let's say your research said, hey, there's going to be autonomy in the future. If you said that autonomy will require, these types of things to be around the runway, then that's something you might want to mention if autonomy, needs those things, and you justify that through your research and your 2050s aviation landscape ideas. Those are things that you can mention. So if it's relevant to the technologies, that's certainly things that you can mention in your paper.
Great. I think we can skip over the size requirements. I think we've addressed that. I'll move on to should hangars be included in design plans?
So that's another. It also depends on your airport, right? Some airports have more hangars than others. Some might not have any. And that's perfectly up to you to include in your paper, right? One student might say, hey, there's going to be this whole autonomous maintenance repair hangar. Sure, if that's something you want to include in your design and it's in your 2050s aviation landscape, feel free to mention it. If you have an airport that doesn't have hangars, because maybe it's kind of more of a pass-through point, that's also up to you to decide and justify.
Perfect. Is an air traffic control tower needed in the design?
So, while air traffic management is not something we want you to focus on, obviously airports may or may not have air traffic control towers in the future. And so based on your 2050s aviation landscape research, uh, you may find that, hey, well, we'll still have air traffic control towers in the future or not. And so that's really up to you.
And what specifically is the competition looking for in terms of safety concerns and specifications?
Well, lots of new technologies and fuels, especially, right? They all have their different concerns and safety aspects, right? So if certain types of fuels might be combustible, right? So if you say, hey, we're going to choose this fuel, and your research might show that that fuel has certain safety concerns or safety aspects that you really need to look at when implementing it. And so we really want to see that students are, throughout their research and development and design, taking into account the different safety concerns of the various technologies that they might choose to implement in their 2050s landscape and design of the airport.
Now I'm going
And
to ask,
before
Okay.
Before we jump to the next slide, there was a question in the chat that was sort of related to the air traffic control tower, so I figure we just go ahead and address it now. Kirsten asked that although it was mentioned that we should not focus on ground transportation to the airport, can we discuss air transportation?
So Kirsten, I guess you can clarify more, but I'm going to make an assumption on that. Um, you know, yes, NASA's doing a lot of research on things like urban air mobility. So if you say, hey, well, they're not taking a taxi, well, a ground taxi, right? You might say, hey, the airport has a vertiport for UAM operations, and that's very acceptable to put in your report if that's something that you plan out as part of your 2050s aviation landscape. If that's what you're kind of the things you're referring to.
I may also bring in one of these questions to Stephen from Michael. He had asked, how much space should we spend justifying what type of fuel our planes would use and what they look like? That alone seems like it could take several pages. It's a little bit of a programmatic question and a little bit of a technical question.
Yeah, so you could probably spend 30 pages talking about any specific one of these design choices, right? And so I mentioned before, this is really a high level thing, and you might want to spend a page or two talking about the aviation landscape, and then the rest of your pages talking about your design. And we really leave that up to your best judgment. And you know, we're looking to see that you're thinking through on not only doing your research, but taking that research into consideration for what the future might need to accommodate for the climate-friendly planes and aviation technologies of tomorrow. Uh, so that really is up to you. Um, I think I think enough to let us know why you're choosing that fuel. Um, but I wouldn't focus 3 pages on saying, hey, that's why I chose to use this fuel. You really want to leave room for all of the other justifications and design choices that you're going to make.
Perfect. All right, moving along. Can we assume that other airports have the same type of alternative fuel?
Yep. Like I said, a lot of the assumptions of what the 2050s aviation landscape is going to be up to you. So you could say they all have the same fuel. You could say they all have different fuels. Um, it's really up to you.
Perfect. Do we have to design for protection against natural disasters?
Certainly, natural disasters are a concern in the future, but like a lot of some of the other topics, we don't want you to focus your efforts on aspects that aren't necessarily uh, the climate-friendly aviation planes or fuels and technologies. So you might mention, because you choose to put your airport in a certain location, a couple of sentences about, hey, we might have to consider these aspects for the gates for this thing, but we don't want you to focus on, the mitigation of environmental disasters. We really want you to focus on the aviation technologies and how those technologies affect the airport infrastructure and kind of the interplay in between those two things.
Great. You've addressed these a little bit, Stephen, but should we include the altitude of the airport? And I'll tie this one in. Do we have to consider the temperature and general climate effect on the efficiency of our exterior systems?
So altitude and general weather are things that people in airports have to worry about. So, depending on the location that you choose, if you choose a location or something generic, those might be factors you want to consider. Icing is a thing. Obviously, weather has impacts on flights. We've all had delayed flights, right? Um, and some airports might even be in a location where certain types of flights aren't possible due to things like altitude. So they are important aspects to consider. And just like your problems that you probably do every day for engineering school, right? You want to list out probably some assumptions saying, hey, we're designing an airport at sea level, so maybe certain things aren't part of your design. Or you might say, hey, we're putting this somewhere slightly at altitude, so we're going to have these concerns and address them with these technologies for these types of airplanes.
All right. Well, Stephen, I think we've touched on all of our technical questions at the moment. So again, if anyone has any further questions on technical or program, please feel free to write them in the chat, or we'll address them as we're able. We'll also have an opportunity for folks to turn on their mic at the end of this session. So we'll turn over to Stacy to answer some of the next few questions. So Stacy, is this competition expecting a 3D model of our design?
So no, the only real requirement from a visual perspective is that digital infographic that Stephen mentioned earlier that's due at the time of your technical paper submission, which again is March 3rd. We're going to keep that date imprinted in the back of your brains. Similarly, even for those teams that are selected as finalists, there will be no expectation of a 3D model or a virtual model or anything like that in their presentations. However, if you really want to do either of those things, you're certainly welcome to. The only thing that we ask is that you make sure to do it in a format or in a platform that's accessible just to the general public, including us, because we want to make sure that we're able to see the things that you guys have developed without having to have any sort of specialized software or platforms that we need to view that in.
Great.
Go into that real quick. Hold on.
Yeah.
Right. If it's not part of the, right, if it's not in the technical paper is what we'll be judging in addition to the infographic and the video. So, if you try to, attach something separate, we can certainly look at it, but we can't be unfair to other teams, right, in assessing the content of the required submitted portions.
Right. So it won't give you any bonus points or be evaluated separately.
Yeah, but some students might choose, and like you see in the competition guidelines, we might love to see pictures in the report. So if you have room for something, and someone wanted to 3D model it and throw in an isometric view in a little figure in your paper, sure.
Yeah, we recognize that some folks have different strengths, right? So you might have somebody that this is a particular strength of theirs and they're able to do that quickly and easily, or maybe not quickly, but a little with less effort. But we don't want you spending a lot of your time on something like that because it's not what the competition is being evaluated on. So
Some
spend your
students
time
might
wisely.
choose to do a 2D one as well, right? So if it's all going to end up on paper, it might look fairly similar. So
Good points. Moving along to something similar. What will the poster generally have on it?
So I think, Janice, you covered this right up front earlier today. The poster for the finalist teams will have a little bit of a poster session, and it's an opportunity for you to actually take your infographic and just print it out on a bigger size, the poster size that we've provided for you. I think it's about 3 foot by 4 foot. You'll print that out and bring it with you to the forum if you're a finalist team so that other people can see and come by and talk to you during your poster session and hear a little bit about your design and the work that you did. So we included some information here. I'm not going to read it out for you. And Stephen went over earlier again about what he expected to have in an infographic. It's listed in the guidelines document, but it's really just a good blend of both visual and textual information that explains to us a little bit about some of your design choices. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, there's more emphasis on the visual aspect than the textual aspect on this particular infographic.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, all of these extra pieces of information are included in the competition guidelines. So you can refer to it here in the recording, which will be on our frequently asked questions, or go back to those competition guidelines. That's your main source. Moving right along, is all of the work prior to the design meant to describe what our design ideas are?
So we were all a little bit unclear about what this question is, but to the best of our ability, what we think you're asking is about kind of, well, I guess I can just respond and talk a little bit about what we said here verbatim. The technical paper is meant to be, a research paper that includes key findings from your research that have informed your design ideas. So I think Stephen actually went over this at the very beginning. The technical paper is comprised of 2 sections. The first is your description of the 20s, 50s aviation landscape assumptions that your team is making based on the research that you did. And then the second portion of the paper, where there's a lot more emphasis should be placed on that section, on the second portion here, is what does your design look like to accommodate what you have found in your research and the assumptions that you're making on the future landscape. So that is kind of what we're looking for in the technical paper. I hope that answers your questions. We also have listed here verbatim, and this is taken directly out of the competition guidelines that Janice just mentioned you going back and looking at. We've included things that have to be in your paper. They are all listed here. First and foremost, we want you to identify and implement or talk about the identification and implementation of alternative or renewable fuels and complementary aeronautics concepts or shapes and designs. This, as you can see, is very important. So gives you an idea of where you want to focus a little bit of your space and time. And then give an assessment of what you think the landscape will be like for the aviation in 2050s, and some of the factors that you want to focus on that will affect that. Then we want you to have talk a little bit about what some of the innovative capabilities and technologies are, and then why you chose your design. And this is where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time. Why you chose to have different configurations in the airport or systems or approaches. And we want you to talk about them in terms of value in the areas of technology readiness, system performance, safety, and affordability. And I'm not going to keep reading through here, but we also finally want to see a timeline of key technology advancements to achieve your 2050 airport design. So over the next 30 years, when do you think some of these key technology advancements are going to happen or will need to happen to get to the point where your design could be implemented in 2050s?
Perfect. What specifically counts as a federal employee acting within the scope of employment?
So this is always a tricky one, but basically it refers to any civil servant who is currently working for and getting paid for that work by the federal government. So that could include pathways interns at NASA who are receiving pay for their internship, or any other federal co-op student at any other federal agency. If you are a co-op student that is working at a federal agency, but you're in one of those times where you're not actively working and getting paid for, so maybe you're taking the semester off or the year off to just focus on school and you're not actually getting paid for work by the government during that time, then you can participate in the challenge. However, that can become a sticky point for the internship because depending on the type of co-op student that you are, you may not be eligible to also receive the NASA internship as a prize on top of what you already have going. So we would work through those particulars with any individual who might be in that category, but I just wanted to throw a heads up that that might make you ineligible to receive the NASA internship as a prize, but you could still participate in the challenge. And the reasoning, just so that everyone understands why we can't allow federal employees to participate, because if you are selected as a finalist team, your team will be receiving a financial stipend, a monetary award, and the government cannot double pay somebody for work being done for them. So if you were doing any work at all in relationship to aviation or an airport at all, and then you also received funding from that award to support travel to come to this, it's almost like the government is paying you from 2 different sources for the same thing. And we just have to be very careful about the rules and regulations surrounding that.
Great. How much space, well, this goes back into some of those questions about space in the report. So how much space should we allot for justifying which types of aircraft and fuel should be used? And I believe Michael asked a question very similar to this. So do you want to sort of reiterate the answer, Stacy?
Yep, the answer is it's up to each team. You all are going to be focusing on different aspects of future aviation, which is really cool because we don't want to read, 100 of the same papers. We want to see some differences and having folks look at different aspects. That's part of the fun of the competition and part of making sure that we're covering all of the bases. So we really, we want all of these papers to be different. We want all the different things that you're focusing on to be different. The sizes of the airports to be different. We don't want to have to tell you specifically what you need to do. Once you've determined what aspects that you want to focus on for your paper, you'll have to just really determine how much space you think is appropriate to get your point across and to justify your assumptions. And that it really is going to be different for everyone.
Great.
Use your best judgment.
Can we justify certain choices by predicting airline companies will help finance certain key infrastructure pieces?
So yeah, you're welcome to make any design choices, any predictions that you believe are justifiable. Again, just provide a good rationale for it.
Great. And will we require advanced knowledge for some things?
So yeah, you definitely, you don't have to have advanced knowledge, but you have to have good predictions. So you want to do some research that we've mentioned 100 times on what the types of future aviation markets are, designs of airplanes, their fuels that they'll be using, all of that. Do the research on things that are already being discussed or considered for the future and make some assumptions based on a very educated guess on the research based on that research, and design your external elements of the airport to accommodate those changes. So none of us have a crystal ball. We can't see into the future, but you can definitely find out what is being talked about, what is potentially being considered, and make some good educated guesses on what you think will happen and why.
Yeah, and I'll hook onto that, Stacy, real quick. It doesn't have to be just things that NASA are talking about. It can be things that anyone is talking about for the future of aviation. And there might be things that come about in the 2050s that we aren't even talking about now. And so if you make those predictions based on your research, we'd love to see them. So.
Before we move on to programmatic questions, one question did just come in that's relevant to the clarification around federal work. So question from Kirsten is, if you do federal work study, are you eligible to participate in the competition?
So federal work study through through the Pell program or through things that have come in through your FAFSA, that does not count. And so you would still be eligible to participate in the challenge. That's a little bit different pocket of funding.
Great, perfect. Some other questions have come in relevant to the programmatic questions, so we'll kind of tack those on here if they're not addressed. So first and foremost, are we allowed to add team members through the process?
Absolutely, as long as you don't exceed the total team size limit of 6 members, you can add and subtract folks along the way.
And can a team still participate if an NOI was not submitted?
Absolutely. In fact, we've actually changed on our website the NOI deadline. Initially was so that we could be able to have this Q&A and have an opportunity to reach out to anybody who was interested in the challenge early on so that we could help kind of guide you moving forward and making sure that you were moving in the right direction. But we did just change the NOI deadline to be a rolling deadline so that if there are some students out there that find out about the challenge after the NOI, they still have time to participate. But we do ask that if you have not yet submitted an NOI, that you please do so at your earliest convenience because it's in your best interest. The NOI form is how we have contact information for the folks that are interested in the challenge. And once we have your contact information, we can send you emails and keep you up to date on anything that changes with the program, and even sometimes to provide you with some resources that will be helpful for you as you do your proposal, as you start working through the technical paper. So, once we have your contact information, then we can update you. If we don't have your contact information through the NOI, we can't. So it really is in your best interest. And then it also helps NASA as well. It helps us to understand how many technical paper submissions we can be expecting, and ensure that we have an appropriate number of reviewers to review them in time to make our selection notifications for the finalists. And I did see that there was a question in the chat asking about how many finalist teams, and Stephen answered it in the chat, but just to say it out loud to everyone, we are able to bring up to 8 teams to the forum.
Perfect. This goes back to the faculty advisor. What should I do if I don't yet have a faculty advisor? And there was another question that Stacy, I believe you answered in the chat that was, does the faculty advisor need to be from our university?
So yes, you do have to have one main faculty advisor from the university. And the way that you can do that is just start asking some of your professors. They don't even have to be a professor that you are actively taking a course in now or that you've taken one with. Just maybe somebody who might have some interest in civil engineering or aviation or aeronautics or any of those disciplines that might lend themselves well to this challenge. Just ask if they're willing to serve. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that you understood as you're asking your advisor is what is the role of a faculty advisor, and that can help you in your ask. So really, they're taking on a role as your mentor, and like I said, that can be as much or as little as they'd like. So they can even be a very hands-off mentor, but they really need to agree to help manage the monetary awards at the university if your team is selected as a finalist. And that's ensuring that they understand the university protocols and how to disperse it appropriately to help cover your travel and those sorts of things. So it's really just to enable your team to be able to participate without a whole lot of hiccups at the university. And we're not allowed to send money to students directly. We have to send it to the university on your behalf. So that faculty advisor kind of acts as the middle person. We also will be sending out all of our communication to both the student team leader and to the advisor. So then, we also just ask that between the two of them, they make sure that they jointly are sharing those email updates with the rest of the team. So that's really the role of the advisor. It doesn't have to take up much of their time.
Great. So along those same lines, can teams have more than one advisor?
Absolutely. Like we said, the first one has to be from the university, and anyone else after that could be from different universities within the United States. They can't be international mentors, but you're also even welcome to have some industry advisors if you have folks who'd be willing to serve as mentors to your team.
Perfect. Can permanent residents participate in the competition?
Legal permanent residents, or green card holders, as they're sometimes referred to, you can participate in the competition, but unfortunately would not be eligible to receive the competition prize. NASA internships are not open to legal permanent residents.
Okay. Along the lines of internships, so we've had a few questions about this. First, are the internship applications available after the finalists are chosen? And then we also had a question about, are the intern locations at a set location? And there's some curiosity around what kinds of internships, what will the titles of the internships will be. So maybe Stacy and Stephen, you guys can both tag team that one.
Okay, I'll start if that's okay. So the answer is yes, that we will be letting all of the finalist teams know with some specific directions on how they can apply for the internships. So there will be an internship that is put into the system, but not until we select our finalists. It'll be put into the NASA NIFS, which is their internship database of all the different things. And it will actually be titled something along the lines of Blue Skies or Gateways to Blue Skies, finalists only, or something of that nature. And there will be a remark there that it's only available to the teams who are selected as finalists. And then once we actually have the forum, we will be announcing which of the 6 students have been selected for those internships. And we're not going to get into all of the nitty-gritty details right now because it is going to be very individually based on who those 6 finalists are and what their strengths are. But there are opportunities for internships with the Aeronautic Mission Directorate at several of the different NASA centers. And so we can kind of talk with the students then and find out what their interests and programmatic skills are and make matches for them at that time. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Stephen or Koshik?
Specifically for this one, I know I did have something to mention on the faculty, which we just mentioned a second ago.
Go for it.
And I know everyone, the role of everyone's faculty advisor will be different, but going back to the main purpose of our competition, really we want to get the students doing the research, the students doing the thinking, the decision making and the justification making. Really, we really want the students to be doing all of the work for this. And so the advisor is an advisor and can also, help with some of the financial aspects that might be needed for, sending the teams, to the finalists forum. So we're really excited to hear what the students think up, since everyone who's the students are going to be having to deal with the 2050s more than some of the rest of us. So you'll be doing the research in the 2050s and you'll be in the aviation industry. So we're really excited to get your ideas.
Now, I'll stay on that. There was a question in the chat about the faculty and the advisors. Can the faculty advisor be a green card holder?
So the answer to that one is actually yes. If they are a legal permanent resident, then we are allowed to send funds to the university on their behalf.
Great. Next question is, can we have a team member participate who is less than 18 years old?
So yes, as long as that student is enrolled in the team's college or university. So we understand that sometimes there's dual enrollment or things of that nature where folks might still be in high school or might be a little bit, or they might just go to college a little bit early or have skipped a year and come a little bit early. Yes, they can, but they do have to be enrolled at your university in one way, shape, or form. And if they are under 18 at the time of the forum, they would have to be accompanied by a parent or guardian if they're selected as a finalist team and invited to the forum. The other thing that we do want to mention is that individuals under 18 years old may not be eligible for the competition prize. So there's just some strange things around underage folks with an asset internship. Sometimes there's possibilities for them too, and sometimes there's not. So we'd work with them on an individual basis, but we just want to let you know again that there's a possibility they may not be eligible for that NASA internship.
Speaking of internships, we had a question from Damien. He asks, it's not just the winning team that gets the internships per se. In other words, there are 6 internships that are available to anyone on the finalist teams if they distinguish themselves.
So the way that we are kind of approaching that from this perspective is that if a winning team has 6 members that are all interested and eligible for the NASA internship, then we would certainly invite those members of the winning team first. However, if they don't have 6 members and maybe they only have 4, there might be an opportunity to open up 2 more internship slots to somebody else from one of the other finalist teams, perhaps from the 2nd place winning team or the 3rd place winning team. And so we wanted to leave the flexibility to be able to have a few folks who might not be from the winning team in case if there's some from the winning team that aren't able to participate in the NASA internship. Maybe they're graduating and they already have a job, or maybe they don't meet the GPA requirement, which is a 3.0, by the way, and they don't wiggle on that at all. You have to have a minimum 3.0 to be eligible for a NASA internship. So that's kind of how we're tackling that at this point. I hope that makes sense.
Great, thank you, Stacy. We're at the point, just for everyone in the Q&A, if you do have any additional questions, now is the time to put them in the chat or raise your hand and to be able to ask them on camera. We do have a question that came in. I believe either of you guys can answer this. Question on citations. How would you like us to cite our sources for some of the predictions that we will be making? And another question is, will the citation still count as a page being used up on the report?
Yeah, so I know I put in an answer underneath that. But it does say in our guidelines that there is no preference for citation formatting, but they must be formatted uniformly and correctly. You can't just put in a link. That was not an acceptable format. And you can put your citations or references in an appendix, which are not included in your 5 to 7 page limit. The 5 to 7 page was really for the body of your paper, where the technical research is.
Yeah, really, those appendices, only use them for your citations, for your references. We sometimes have teams that try to throw additional information into an appendix so that they extend the length of the paper, but the judges are not going to review anything that is in the appendix and count it towards your evaluation. So please don't try to do that.
So
Great.
there's a question. I
We
see
do
one
have,
question. Yeah, it talks
yeah.
about the GPA restriction applying to all students on the team.
Mhm.
And anyone's wrong can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the GPA restriction is mainly just for the eligibility for the internship as the prize. So anyone, regardless of your GPA, can participate. You can even be, regardless of your GPA, even be a finalist in the forum here at Langley. But the GPA, when you go to apply for the internship, is kind of a hard cutoff. So.
Great. Well, again, if anyone would like to ask any other questions, oh, looks like we have one about can we have footnotes or tags to the appendix if the judges would like more information about certain calculations and justifications?
So you'll see in our guidelines that you can use appendices for calculations, but if you put, something in the footer that links to a paragraph justification in the appendix, we're not going to read that and consider it. If you're saying, you know, this is how we sized something, but see the actual calculation in the appendix, that's something that is acceptable.
Great. Any other questions out there?
Or I know the chat has gotten a little lengthy, and we apologize if we've not answered something that's in the chat. So please let us know if your question hasn't been answered yet. We want to make sure we didn't accidentally overlook anyone.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, just reminding everyone that if you do have future questions, please email those to blueskies@nianet.org. We will respond to those directly. Those questions will also be posted on the Frequently Asked Questions webpage, so everyone will be able to see the questions. Likewise, this Q&A session will be posted on that Frequently Asked Questions page on our Blue Skies website. That will be posted by next week. Just a reminder, as Stacy said, we really want to drill into you that March 3rd is the next deadline. So we look forward to seeing your technical papers, your infographics, your videos. And I know that Stephen and Kushik and our reviewers are all looking forward to what you have to produce and your design concepts and your justifications. So we're very much looking forward to that. And again, if there's no other questions, we'll wrap this up and get those questions and answers out to you. Looking forward to it. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys. We can't wait to see your designs.